Welcome, everyone, to our Salon number 71, Rematriating Society, with Sherri Mitchell, Pat McCabe, and Vicki Noble in the Maternal Gift Economy Breaking Through series, hosted by Genevieve Vaughan and the International Feminists for Gift Economy. We are very happy to have you with us today. I'm Letecia Layson, your moderator. Our first speaker is going to be Vicki Noble. She is a feminist artist, writer, healer, wisdom teacher, author of 8 books, including Shakti Woman, Feeling Our Fire, Healing Our World, The Double Goddess, Women Sharing Power. And in the late 70s, Vicki co-created, along with Karen Vogel, the first round feminist tarot deck, Mother Peace. Many of us have been using these for years. Vicki has traveled and taught internationally, leading pilgrimages to sacred goddess sites around the world and facilitating workshops and seminars. I had the great pleasure of being part of Heidi Gutner Abendroth's first Modern Matriarchal Studies Institute in English with Vicki and Genevieve. It was really quite a delight. So welcome, Vicki. You can read more about her at our website. Our second speaker is Sherri Mitchell. Sherri was born and raised in Penobscot Indian Reservation. She received her Juris Doctorate and a certificate in Indigenous Peoples Law and Policy from the University of Arizona, James E. Rogers College of Law. Sherri has done so many things. Most importantly, her new initiative, which I hope she'll talk to you about. She's the founding director of the Land Peace Foundation, an organization dedicated to the global protection of Indigenous rights and the preservation of Indigenous way of life. She is also an author of Sacred Instructions, many contributors to books, and we welcome you, Sherri. Sherri is actually taking some time out of a main event that she's having on her land right now. So she'll probably tell you about that. She may not be able to stay with us, but we're just very happy to have her. Pat McCabe is an artist, activist, and grandmother. She is a bridge between Indigenous wisdom and the modern world. She opens her heart, and clarity of vision have touched people all over the globe. Through her speaking, writing, art, and ceremony, Pat reframes questions about sustainability, balance, power, and gender. Pat devotes her work to supporting the next generations in being functional members of the Hoop of Life and upholding the honor of being human. I have the great pleasure of being in a series right now of workshops where Complicit No More and a return to the mother law. Maybe Pat will tell us just a tiny bit about that. Genevieve is also attending that with us. So welcome, all 3 of you. And I would just like to turn this over to Vicki. So welcome, Vicki.
Thank you. I was prepared for someone else to begin, so I'm fine if Sherri, for instance, if you need to be first, we could. Okay, it's good. Okay, well, I'm gonna start with what I sent to my newsletter this week, in where I wanted my people to know about this salon. And I think it's a good introduction for why I would be here talking about rematriation, which I have to say is a word that wasn't familiar to me until recently, when Native women began to use it and bring it forth. But I sort of feel like my work, my awakening in the 70s and my work in the women's spirituality movement and my work in the making the mother peace, all of that was kind of a instinctual way that we women with European descent we're trying to rematriate in our own society. And I just sort of, I like the word. I hope I'm using it in a way that makes sense. I feel like it's very apt. But what I wrote was, return to matriarchy now. This has been my call for more than 40 years. When Karen Vogel and I created the Mother Peace Tarot in the late 1970s, we made a deep dive into the ancient prehistory of Afro-Eurasia and the goddess civilization. We were finding that through the art, the artifacts, archaeological work, anthropological work, mythological work. It soon became clear from the anthropology and ethnology that we were reading that most indigenous cultures around the world were living lives based on similar values and organizing their tribes in peaceful, female-centered ways. After decades of investigation, I've come to believe that these matriarchal values and organizational structures belong to the earliest strata of modern human beings, Homo sapiens, and came out of Africa tens of thousands of years ago, spreading to all parts of the world. Old Europe, as Maria Gimbutas named it, was one early, highly evolved and very long-lasting manifestation of this universal matriarchal human tendency. After several thousand years of peace and well-being, the cultures of old Europe were invaded, conquered, and hybridized by violent male Indo-Europeans. The DNA research since 2015 has really shown us these are facts now. They're no longer conjecture as they were when we were making the Mother Peace cards. And so Europe became an origin point of organized warfare, male dominance, and according to the DNA record, the rape and abduction of women, alongside the wholesale murder of indigenous old European men, the farmer men. Those of us women with European ancestry have to reach a long way back to reclaim our matriarchal and indigenous roots. But thanks to the work of Maria Gimbutas and recent DNA studies, the evidence makes it possible for us to do so. In the last 2 decades, it's been my privilege to meet up with Indigenous women from the living matriarchal cultures I used to research. And I'm honored to be invited to present my work here in the company of these 2 brilliant Native women. So that's what I sent out, and that's what I feel and believe really deeply. And in the 70s, I had become a healer. It had awakened in me. I didn't go looking for it, but it was not something that belonged at all to my own culture. And so by the seat of my pants, I was learning how to do hands-on healing, how to understand the body in a more systemic way, and how to move away from Western medicine and really Western thought in so many ways. It was, I had a feeling of crossing over. The more I read, the more I studied, the more I looked at ancient images, I just felt like an outsider, an alien in my own culture. And I gravitated more and more to, to matriarchal concepts and ideas. And about that time in the late 70s, I lived in Berkeley, and it was very political there. And the native activists, AIM, basically told us, keep your hands off our stuff and go back to your own roots. Go find your spiritual roots. And at the time I thought, oh no, a Presbyterian? I can't do that. But of course, that is what we did. We went back to our roots, but we had to go so far back in order to do that. And that's the nascent women's spirituality movement at that time. That's the way it was coming together. Just this sort of intuitive, instinctual quest for something, for a more meaningful expression of what was inside of us. And it was like waking up or remembering. And then it was a deep dive into scholarship, into independent research and scholarship. And I've been doing that ever since with a lot of joy. I never wanted to go to graduate school after I got my BA. I did finally get a master's, but it was never a goal. I loved being free to open my own investigations and follow my own urgings. So what we discovered, and especially after the books of Gimbutas began to come out in the, I didn't see her books, I don't think, until about 82, but it was so illuminating and she was so helpful. I think the whole women's spirituality movement kind of coalesced around Maria because she was so interdisciplinary and she gave us such hard evidence to support the intuitions and the understandings that we were already developing about a goddess culture or a much earlier peaceful, sustainable, earth-based culture that functioned in a mother kinship system. And of course, you know, it's taken the culture a long time to accept that was true. Her work took a long time to be documented and confirmed, but it has been now. The DNA material has really done that. And what I believe is that there was a worldwide matriarchy because we all came from the same place. We all came out of Africa. We all belong to the same root people. And the $1 million question is always what happened. You know, what happened? What happened to those Indo-European men who came into Europe and crashed our culture? What happened? How did that happen? How could patriarchy, you know, it just couldn't evolve. It's a terrible, aberrant response to something. Maybe climate, that's what people like to talk about, desertification, you know, climate change, things that moved people and so on. But what I would like, I have, if maybe the first thing I'd like to do is share a PowerPoint. So this is part of a much longer course that I taught a couple of years ago on Maria Gimbutas, her life, her work, her concepts, and how I've taken that into my own work and made my own concepts about it over the years. So this is just one module from that 7-module course. And I thought it would be interesting for us just to look at the ways that old Europe presented so many of the concepts that we've come to understand belong to matriarchal cultures in general. So the word matristic was the word that Gimbutas settled on because when her first book used the word matriarchy, and she used it a lot in the 50s and 60s. But when she put her books out in the 80s, she started to use the word matristic. She kind of capitulated to the furor that the word matriarchy was causing in the archaeological world. People couldn't handle it. They thought it meant, you know, the opposite of patriarchy, women ruling, and with that concept that comes from patriarchy. So she just gave it up and used the word matristic, which means female-centered, which basically works just as well. Although I've always felt attached to the word matriarchy, you know, beginning with the mothers, it feels to me like it's accurate. And I hate when the cultural paradigms decide that we can't use a certain word, you know. So I've always held on to it, and then when and so these are just examples of the ways that I've used the concept and worked with collage over the years, and worked in my teaching with mostly women of European descent, trying to really show us that we have roots. We have matriarchal roots. We have indigenous roots. They're just way back there in the beginning of farming. And but those farming cultures were sustainable, and they lasted a long time, 3,000 or 4,000 years. I mean, that's really amazing. They stayed the same, more or less. They spread all over Europe. And so my idea here is just to help us, those of us who have been only in a patriarchal culture our whole lives, to imagine what it would be like to be honored as older women, to be honored as we become elders, because that's so unlikely in Western patriarchal culture. Even now, when Kamala Harris, is trying to become president, already the misogyny is starting to come up and be part of the conversation, just like it was with Hillary Clinton. I mean, we cannot imagine women in power. I sometimes think it's because men are afraid of, that we'll take it out on them, that we'll take it out in reverse. But I don't believe that's true. So it was thrilling for me when in 2003, I went to the first matriarchal studies international conference that Haida planned, and Jen was there, and that's what Letecia was talking about. And it was thrilling for me because I had done all of this research and been so involved in trying to sort of bring forth and disseminate information about multicultural ways of life and matriarchal cultures that were I didn't know there were so many matriarchal cultures still extant until that conference. And not only did we hear about it and study about it, Haida brought the matriarchal women and men actually to the conference to speak to us. It was amazing. So those of us who had been studying and promulgating in some way these ideas, which were not particularly accepted in our own culture, came together with the very people we had revered in our studies, and we got to have dialogue and conversation, and it was just amazing. It was mind-blowing for me. It was like an integration came together. So that was very exciting, and has been ever since. So that was, more than 20 years ago. So these are just some, I love to use images. I think it's so much more powerful than just ideas. And so here are some of the various living matriarchal cultures today that we've been learning about at our conferences from all the good work that women have been doing. I won't go into all of them, but just that you see the variety. And, the reason I think that's important, so I've gone back, is that anthropologists told us in the 70s and the 80s, and they were just absolutely sure about it, that there weren't any living matriarchal cultures. And therefore, we could not say there ever had been. And so it was like a double bind that they put us in. And of course, the reason that they felt that way is because they still saw matriarchy in the wrong ways. They didn't see matriarchy as it is, as egalitarian and earth-based, and well, the egalitarianism is the most important thing. That women are not oppressing men in these cultures. The men are thriving, and they came to the conference to tell us that. It was wonderful. So then to go back to my own culture, these are from 5,000 BCE and thereabouts. And you know, it was so expressive and so artistic and so peaceful and so much Gimbutas gave us much evidence, even at that time in the 1980s and 90s, about the female kinship system. She already saw that in the archaeology. And and everyone disagreed. And now, of course, you know, you can't, it's undebatable because of the DNA work. But these are just some examples of, you know, Çatalhöyük and some of the old, the Çatalhöyük was first, just to be clear, was the earliest really important goddess center that we know about. And those people from Anatolia, the land of the mothers, which is modern day Turkey, they moved into Europe. They went on boats to Cyprus and then Crete and then Greece, and then finally migrated up to the Danube River and spread out so that the culture was spread out all the way to Ukraine, and a whole other wing of that ancient culture came up on the west coast of Europe. We found out that from the DNA research as well. So you know, it was a culture that spread far and wide, and it was a culture that was peaceful and had no weapons. When the Indo-Europeans came in, that was the first weapons. And you can imagine a culture, how, I mean, it was a civilization. You can imagine how unprepared they would have been for violent men with weapons on horseback. Here are some of the things that Gimbutas told us about old Europe, that the older women were heads of families. She told us about the, you know, the burials, told us that it was a matrifocal culture where the women stayed, you know, where their mothers lived, and the lineage went on. Here's the mother and her brother, you know, I don't think we deified or reified fatherhood until very late, probably the Bronze Age. Probably it came in with patriarchy and patriarchal marriage. But that's a whole story in itself. And then my work has sort of branched off into the Amazons, because I believe that the Amazons, there's a lot of folklore about Amazons ruling in dual queenship. And these are, and they say, you know, a war queen and a domestic queen, but there was no war. This is from, this one on the left is from Ain Ghazal in Jordan from the 8th millennium. There was no war in the 8th millennium. And so these are queens, you might say, you know, that's the language we would use now, but they were, as I called it, women sharing power, maybe spiritual and mundane, you know, maybe working out the different, making solutions for the culture that were on the different levels. So these are all double goddess images from very early. And this one, the one from Syria, is the first time that they're crowned. The first time that I know of that they're crowned images. So in the Bronze Age, we have queens, and in the Bronze Age, we have war. And so then we start having a different expression of the women's governance. Before that, I believe, and in most cases, I think in living matriarchal cultures, women rule as a group. We say women-centered because the women are at the center of the culture, and their values flow out from them, and the the culture is, I mean, just think of men's testosterone being pacified by all that oxytocin working in harmony to govern. It makes sense. So I could go on for hours about that, but I won't. Let's go back. What I really want to share, if I have time, is I want to do the thing we talked about, this being so-called Columbus Day, about, Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day and all that. And so what I really wanted to focus on was, I had read years ago a book by Sylvia Federici, Caliban and the Witch, terrible title, I think, but fabulous, wonderful book. And what she brought to my mind at that time that I didn't know about, but I certainly instinctually understood it, was that what went on with the witch burnings in Europe under the Inquisition was happening at the very same time as Columbus in North America and the other Spanish and Portuguese and so on going in and colonizing North and South, Central and South America. So I want to read a little bit from her book, because I thought she was such a profound thinker, and she links us. My thrill in 2003 was that here we were finally coming together across cultures, finally having a bridge of some kind from woman to woman. Not that all women are the same, obviously, but we do have common ground. All women bleed, and it's women who bear children, and we have common ground universally. And out of that came our governance for a very long time. And in many cultures still today, comes from that original social unit, the mother and child. So I want to read some of her language and how she puts together how all of this was happening as a process leading to capitalism. She actually believes that the witch burnings, the native decimation in North America and South America, all of the slavery that was happening at the same time, Africans being taken from their culture and brought to Europe, actually, which I didn't know, and then to America. All of that, she says, is one thing. That's all one thing. And it was all necessary for the origin of capitalism, which is just devastating. So she says, it's no exaggeration to say that women were treated with the same hostility and sense of estrangement accorded Indian savages in the literature that developed on this subject after the conquest. The parallel is not casual. In both cases, literary and cultural denigration was at the service of a project of expropriation. As we will see, the demonization of the American indigenous people served to justify their enslavement and the plunder of their resources. In Europe, the attack waged on women justified the appropriation of their labor by men and the criminalization of their control over their own reproduction. None of the tactics deployed against European women and colonial subjects would have succeeded had they not been sustained by a campaign of terror. In the case of the European women, it was the witch hunt that played the main role in the construction of their new social function and the degradation of their social identity. The definition of women as demonic beings and the atrocious and humiliating practices which so many of them were subjected to left indelible marks on the collective female psyche and in women's sense of possibilities. The witch hunt was a turning point in women's lives. It's the equivalent of the historic defeat to which Ingalls alludes as the cause of the downfall of the matriarchal world. For the witch hunt destroyed a whole world of female practices, collective relations, and systems of knowledge that had been the foundation of women's power in pre-capitalist Europe and the condition for their resistance against feudalism. She says in Mexico and Peru, Spanish authorities did the same thing under the new laws in South America. Under the new laws, married women became men's property and were forced against the traditional custom to follow their husbands to their homes. So the end of matrifocality and the bringing in of patriarchal social structures. Same exactly was happening in Europe. She says thousands of women were burned, hanged, and tortured in less than 2 centuries. I mean, I have read about the witch burnings for 40 years. That was some of the first research that spiritual feminist women did. But what Silvia Federici has done with it is to cast it as the beginning of capitalism and the foundation of capitalism, and the end of reproduction control for European women. What has not been recognized, she says, is that the witch hunt was one of the most important events in the development of capitalist society and the formation of the modern proletariat. I mean, maybe these things seem obvious, but it was just an epiphany for me. Now, this felt so much like what I had read and learned about Native cultures. The witch trials provide an instructive list of the forms of sexuality that were banned as non-productive: homosexuality, sex between young and old, sex between people of different classes, anal coitus, coitus from behind, blah, 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 nudity and dances. Also proscribed was the public collective sexuality that had prevailed in the Middle Ages, as in the spring festivals of pagan origins that were still celebrated at this time all over Europe. May Day in England, you know. She talks about much collective sex and merrymaking. And while we may not personally at the moment be into orgiastic group sex, I do think that pagans and ancient people had festivals where there was a kind of release of the normal structures and behaviors and so on. We know that from studies of festivals. And what it reminded me of was the book I read many, many years ago by Will Roscoe called The Zuni Man Woman. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. I was sort of steeped in the third gender idea for a long time.
1 minute, Vicki, 1 minute.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's see. So connected were the destinies of women in Europe and those of Amerindians and Africans in the colonies that their influences were reciprocal. It was the American experience that persuaded the European authorities to believe in the existence of entire populations of witches and instigated them to apply in Europe the same techniques of mass extermination developed in America. So what I got from that was the ways in which it was reciprocal. What was happening in Europe with the church and women, and the decimation of hundreds of thousands of women murdered for no good reason, just because the state really actually needed that to happen as a form of control. And then the same thing was happening in the Americas. And it was the same arm of the church that was providing the money and support for those genocides, those femicides, those genocides. And so that to me is terribly important as a sort of baseline for the ways in which I hope it's true, that we are coming together more and more and understanding each other and somehow understanding ourselves in a unity. Those of us with European background and those of you with Indigenous background. I hope it's true. And I feel really strongly that what we European women need to be doing is supporting in some way the work of Indigenous activist women who are holding the the centeredness that comes from still having a connection in your bodies to Mother Earth. My work with women my whole
Thank
life
you,
has
Vicki.
been to try to get us back in our bodies. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. Sherri, are you ready for us? We're ready for you. I noticed your book in Vicki's slides. So it's appropriate that you come next. Welcome. We're very happy to have you and for taking the time out from your event to join us.
Yeah, thank you, Letecia. I have a terrible cough. So I apologize in advance for the way that that's gonna be part of our journey together. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a moment. But first of all, hello everyone. Indali we see one hamugwasit, Najio Banawabskewi, Indala Bamakawasus no Banawabskewi, Nagakaka Gus no Tibayik. My name in my language is Wanahamugwasit. I am from the Penobscot Nation. My family is Bear Clan from the Penobscot Nation and Crow Clan from the Passamaquoddy tribe at Tibayik. And there is one Scottish woman who crossed the river during ice skating season and fell in love with my great-great-grandfather, Theodore Bear Mitchell, who fit right in because she was also a clan person who was oppressed by the English and British. So she felt at home with us there in our territory. I'm happy to be with you all here today. One of the things that I want to just start out by saying is that, well, first of all, thank you, Vicki, for what you've shared. I appreciate what you had to offer. And I also just want to say that I'm delighted to be able to be here in conversation with Pat McCabe. I am a big fan of both Pat and her daughter, Lila June, and love reading your writings and often find inspiration in what you share. So it's nice to be able to actually be in person, sort of, in the same space with you. Despite, many opportunities, it just seems to be moving around each other. And so let this be a portal to a physical meeting at some point soon. So when I describe myself in the language, when I tell you who I am and where I come from, what that does is it identifies me in a spatial awareness, a spatial reality, right? It puts me in a specific place. I am Banawabskewi, the land is Banawabskewi, the water is Banawabskewi. Like, we are all connected, we are all one. And so from an Indigenous perspective, I move in this world, not through time, but in a spatial awareness where time moves across that space, but I stay in place within this spatial awareness. And I think that's the difference that Vine Deloria talked a lot about with Indigenous peoples, is that we don't move across time. Time moves across us because we are rooted in place. And that is at the heart of the discussion today, which is this rematriation language. So when I introduce myself in the language, I tell you that I am Banawabskewi, and I am from these places that root me in a specific territory, connected to a specific land, to specific bodies of water, to specific mountains. And so when I traveled across the seas to go meet with our relatives in Aotearoa, who I have a very close relationship with a number of communities there and have for a very long time. When they asked me, what is your water and what is your mountain? I was able to tell them very easily, because we are connected to this place deeply. We are in relationship with this place. And so there are a number of definitions that you're going to find if you asked 10 Indigenous women, what is rematriation? Unless they're all working together directly, you probably are going to get 10 different answers. And that's okay, you know, because we are rematriating ourselves in this process. And so I have my own understanding of this term and what it means. I come from a matricultural society. And so where, you know, clan mothers are at the center and they guide the movement within and around the community. And so our societies are organized in that way according to these natural rhythms. And so we recognize these natural flows of energy. So we have the feminine energy, the masculine energy, the feminine being creative, internal, receptive, intuitive, and that masculine energy being about moving in physicality out in the world. We all have those energies within us, both of them. We intuit, we imagine, we create, and then we bring that out into the world. And we also have here for us in our territory, our Medewalan teachings, which honor and recognize that space in between. It's where the spark of life comes together between that imaginative, intuitive process and the formation of the physical. It's in that space in between where all life is truly created. And so our word for our Medewalan societies comes from the root word that actually means that little tiny space between the skin and the wood on the drum. And when those come together, that's where the sound is formed. And so when we're thinking about all things that are created, we need that space in between. And, you know, and this is what we're learning by the larger language that's happening out in the world right now, moving us out of binaries. It's not just male and female. It's not right or wrong. It's not this or that. There's a whole multiplicity of meaning floating around us that we're not connected to because we've locked ourselves into binaries. So breaking down that binary thinking actually is an act of moving us closer and closer to the truth of our being. It gives us an opportunity to expand the ways that we're thinking about things. So that's part of the place where I come from. That's part of what we call Skijinawe Bamasawagan here in our territory, which is this sacred way of being in relationship with life. And so that's, you know, just setting the stage for where I come from and for what my understanding of the world around me is. And so for us as Chquabanakiek peoples, for Penobscot, Pescatamakati, Woolustug, and Mi'kmaq, which are all my relatives within the same confederation of tribes, is this process of rematriating for us has been this process of putting the sacred feminine and the bodies, minds, and hearts of the women back into their rightful places within our language, our teachings, our ceremonies, our communities, and our nations. So, you know, you can start to see how, you know, rematriation results in all kinds of different activity. There's a lot of different things that are happening when we're thinking about rematriation. It's not just one thing. It's a whole series of things that are about restoring the place of the sacred feminine and the women within all aspects of our living, all aspects of our being, all of the places where we belong, which is everywhere, right? All of the places where decisions are being made. And so when we start to think about this process of rematriation, that reconnection for me holds some great imagery. You know, it's something that I'll get a little bit into. But when I think about, you know, the subject of this Salon, which I was asked to think about, which is rematriation of the land, it feels most closely aligned to the concept of a reversal of colonization. Colonization is this act of separating indigenous peoples from the land, from their homelands. It has done this across the globe, causing mass diaspora and disconnection from the sacredness of life, even from those who were able to remain in place. And in most recent centuries, for the past 600 years, it's caused mass scale removal, forced removal of indigenous people of the Americas and of a number of African nations. And so when we talk about colonization in that way, we're talking about this forced removal, the separation from connection to land. And that can be physically, but it also can be emotionally and spiritually, and in regard to our ways of life. And, you know, this kind of removal that happens, it's often done very violently. And so it leaves these deep wounds within our being, not just physically, but it leaves deep psychic wounds. It leaves deep emotional wounds. It leaves deep spiritual wounds. And if we look at what's happening out in the world today, the way that we have arrived in the place that we are at is the result of a deep spiritual, mental, and emotional illness. There is a rift between human beings and that connection to the sacredness of life. And when I'm thinking about rematriation in all of its forms, including with the land, I'm thinking about a healing of that severance, a healing of that breaking apart from Mother Earth. So rematriation, when thought about in those terms, rematriation in all of its many forms, for me ends up becoming the antidote to that severance of colonization. It's an active process of reconnecting the hearts of the people to the heart of Mother Earth, to the sacred feminine wisdom. It's a healing process that literally reweaves the threads that tie us back into the connection of our umbilical to Mother Earth. And so, you know, just framing my understanding of what rematriation is and how it connects to rematriation of the land. And before I go too much further, I do want to say that, you know, I apologize that I'm likely going to have to leave early. As my dear friend Letecia has said, we are currently in the process of hosting a men's healing gathering here. Last month, we had a women's gathering where we had 177 women from all over the world who came here to gather. And this weekend, it's the time for the men. And at that women's gathering, we talked about holding and healing and opening space for our prayers as women to come in and to hold and surround these men who are coming here to heal. You know, one of the things that has happened in this process of colonization, you know, colonization and the patriarchal vehicle that it has moved through has severed the hearts of the men from their connections to the sacredness of the feminine, both within themselves and in regard to their connection to the earth. And so the decisions that they're making as a result of that breakage, of that umbilical connection to the earth and to their own heart space, the place where, you know, life is created in that space right below our hearts. It is cultivated there in this place where life enters into this world. You know, that creative center, all life that comes in through the bodies of the women, right? The women, the water bearers of the universe, who bring life into this world. That life is created to the rhythm of the beating heart. You know, that is that wisdom of the feminine, that sacred wisdom of the feminine. In our language, the word for grandfather is musimul, and the word for heart is musun. And when we think about the derivative word for grandfather connected to heart, it's an indication of that long span of time that softens that forceful outward energy of the masculine within the man. And it's an entrance of the feminine into his being that softens him and opens his heart to nurture the lives of his grandchildren. And that's how he earns that name of Musumal, of grandfather, is through that long process of softening and bringing in the sacred feminine into his being as he moves through his life. And there's we could spend a whole time talking about that, but that's the as my friend Kevin Deere says, that's the Reader's Digest version. And so when we're thinking about this work in our societies, when they're healthy, it's the mothers and the grandmothers and the aunties who raise the children up, including the men. And we raise them up in a way that their hearts are connected to the earth, that their hearts are aligned with the needs of all of their people, that there's compassion and empathy and a commitment to the well-being of all, an understanding not only of their interrelatedness and interconnectedness, but also in this need for intervulnerability that allows for us to come together in honest ways and heal with one another. And so this work that we're doing here this weekend, I had this experience and ceremony about 20 years ago in Montana where we were at an elders gathering, and they have sunrise ceremony, at gatherings. And we were up in the mountains in Montana, and it was the middle of the summer, and we got snowed on. And it was cold even for us from the north. And we, were waking up on the morning where it was slushy, and there was this slushy drizzle coming down. And for any of you who have been to ceremony with people from the Northeastern Woodlands area and have had the opportunity to be in ceremony with our relatives, the Haudenosaunee, some of whom are in our barn right now at this men's gathering, that they have a Thanksgiving prayer. And when it's told in its fullness, it can take, weeks to tell this prayer, to talk about it, because it goes from the center of the earth all the way to the center of the universe. And so on that particular morning, when I was really cold and feeling a little sorry for myself, and this was 20 years ago, so I wasn't a grandmother yet. And, I was thinking about myself on that morning, and I was cold and everything around me was damp. And I was really praying hard that morning that when they called sunrise ceremony, that it wouldn't be the Haudenosaunee, that it wasn't going to be this 3-hour long prayer. I was like, please let it be a little tiny guy from a Pueblo tribe who hates the cold, and let it be quick so we can go back to bed. And so I was praying really hard on that morning for that. And so I got up, and I, had my blanket wrapped around me, and I went to the fire, and they did a real quick little prayer. And then a gentleman stood up and he goes, all of you women can go back to bed because we're going to do pipe ceremony for the men here this morning. And I was like, yes. So I was excited. I was going to go get a hot cup of tea, and I was going to go back and, go into my little teepee. They had us in teepees out there in this gathering, and they wouldn't let us put a fire in it. It's like, geez. So anyway, I got to the edge of the arbor, and I got a deep conviction that I needed to sit down and to pray for those men, to sit down and put my head down and pray for those men. And so I begrudgingly sat at the outside of the arbor in that cold, drizzling rain and started to pray for those men. And I saw a light appearing in front of me. And I thought, oh, the sun is coming up. And then finally my brain kicked in, and you're in the west, because I'm an Eastern person. You're in the west and you're facing west. That's not the sun. So I just kept praying. And then there was another light over here. And then there was another light over here. And then eventually I counted 12. And I just sat there and kept praying. And then finally it was over, and I opened my eyes, and 12 other women came So there were 13 of us on the outside of that circle praying for those men. Represented of the 13 moons, surrounding the energy. And the message that I got when I was sitting there praying for those men is that we're never going to be strong enough, or able to be strong enough, or strong as we can be. We can't step into our full power because we are powerful beings. We are creators of the universe, right? We bring life into being through our bodies. And we will never be able to stand up as strong as we can possibly be unless we help the men to regain their strength. And a true strength, not this false strength that they get through the patriarchy. And what that represents to me is giving them back their hearts, and then reconnecting those hearts to the sacredness of the feminine and the original mother, and to Mother Earth. And so this work that we're doing here with the men is rematriation, because we're connecting their hearts back to the sacredness of the feminine and back to Mother Earth. Because we face danger from them if they're not strong in true ways. If they're strong in the weak ways that the patriarchy tells them is strength, our bodies are in danger from their fear of our true power. And so in order for us to be able to be as powerful as we can be to face these times that we're facing, we need to help them come up with us. And so, that work is going on behind me, and we're feeding them and we're taking care of them. And so that's why I might have to leave just a little bit early. I'm going to try to stay as long as I can. And if nobody yells to me, I'll just be here. But thinking about that work, as we do this work of rematriating and trying to heal the severed connections. And so from there, just thinking about this concept as within, so without. If we think about our original landscape, that internal landscape, our first ecosystem that we entered into was our mother's womb. We entered into this first ecosystem, this first landscape, as preparation for coming here, Earthside. And so if we start with that internal landscape, how do we cleanse and heal and rebalance the energy within our internal landscape, within that creative center within ourselves, so that we can prepare it for the process of creating new life, whether that's creating a physical life or creating something that we give life to out in the world, and recognizing that we have to reconnect that center with the sacredness of the feminine, of that divine intuition and that heart-based wisdom that's cultivated naturally within that space. And so it's really about realigning what occurs naturally that we've disrupted within ourselves. And so you think about clearing, cleansing, healing, balancing that first ecosystem, that internal landscape within you, before you begin the process of dealing with the external landscape. And I think that there's more of that work that needs to happen, because right now, when we're thinking about land back, which is very important, what we're seeing is a lot of people acting in colonizing ways in relation to land back. I want my piece of the land. I want my piece of the land that I can hold or that I can make profitable. And we have to start thinking about it in different ways. We have to start thinking about it in rematriated ways of thinking. Okay, so we're not just reclaiming land as a holding in the capitalist colonial way, but as a process of healing and renewing our relationship with the land. So the organization that I am the director of, the Land Peace Foundation, is an organization that I founded in 2011 after doing 20 years of work with Indigenous spiritual elders from all over the Americas, working on sacred sites protection and on meaningful and continued access to medicinal plants, ceremonial sites, and other places of import throughout our territories. And so we have built into the Land Peace Foundation this ideology that's in alignment with the values that we hold as Skidginawak peoples, as Indigenous peoples. And so I would like to read a section of our bylaws to you, if that's okay. Do you mind? Do you want to hear this? So this is in the bylaws of the Land Peace Foundation, and I think it's really important. And so I also want to apologize to you for my horrific manners right now. I forgot to bring tissues with me, so I'm using this really lovely scarf that was gifted to me with all these feathers on it as my hanky right now. So I apologize for that. And before I get into this, I just say that there are some people on here that I know who have been here. And we have done an incredible amount of work here that I'll tell you about after I read this. But I have been, some of you know this who have been here in August, I've been sick for 10 months and just progressively getting worse, couldn't figure it out. And we finally learned this 3 days ago that there's one section under the farmhouse in the kitchen that I just finished redoing after 4 years, that there's only a crawl space under that one section of the house, and it's got an inch of mold under the floor. We have to completely, after this weekend, disassemble the entire kitchen and have the whole floor ripped up and deal with this mold. So you know, being aware of your landscape and being in good relationship with it, not having things cut off. You know, this is something that happened here long before I arrived. And also not just medicating yourself, right? They're like, oh, we can't find anything wrong with you, so just take these pills to help alleviate symptoms. Getting to the heart and the root of what's causing the problems is part of the process that we engage in here at the Land Peace Foundation. And so, you know, thankfully, because then we were able to find the problem with this, and we'll be able to correct it, even though it's going to be a daunting process. So back to the bylaws of the Land Peace Foundation. The Land Peace Foundation honors the sovereignty of the land, which means we acknowledge the right that the land has to exist free from molestation and the expectation of human productivity. The reclamation of land by the Land Peace Foundation is viewed as a ceremonial homecoming, a transitional process that moves the land back to its rightful status as a co-equal being, possessing the same rights that we expect for ourselves. It is our intent that the land find sanctuary under the umbrella of our organization. Therefore, the officers and employees of the Land Peace Foundation shall view the land as a living relative, honoring the rights that the land holds when making alterations to or on the land. The Land Peace Foundation further commits to choosing minimally invasive and sustainable practices when working with the land. As an organization and as a collective of human beings, the Land Peace Foundation also honors the right of the land to remain intact. Parcels may be added, but no land shall be marketed or sold unless they are being transferred into the care of an organization with aligned values and commitments toward honoring, healing, and protecting the land. And so that paragraph is in our bylaws, and it drives the ways that we operate here. So when I first got here, the very first thing that I did was I put up a ceremonial arbor. And that was all that I did for a period of time, other than gutting this kitchen that I now have to rebuild. I listened to the land. I brought in wildlife biologists. I asked them, who are my relatives that live here? What are their natural rhythms? Who's nesting in our meadows at this time of year? Where do the deer sleep on our land? What are the migratory birds that pass through our territory? How do we live in balance with their rhythms, not with ours, but with their rhythms? How do we move here and honor their rightful place here? And so, you know, that process was important to us of listening and being here and being in relationship with the land. We wanted to be careful that we don't elevate ourselves amongst any of those other beings that live here, because that elevation is part of, you know, a way of thinking that is not part of our way of thinking. It's not, we see ourselves in relation to multiplicities, not in a linear fashion. Right. And so when you think about yourself as moving through time rather than being in place and having time move around you, what happens is there's a natural entry point for hierarchies to exist. So in that hierarchical thinking process, there's a natural place for inferiority and superiority to jump in. But when you think about yourself in spatial awareness and things moving around you, and you become a being of the circle, then you recognize that everyone is at the top of the circle, no matter where they're sitting. And that all of the beings who live in relationship with us have the same right to live that we do. And so we, you know, we wanted to be thinking about that. We also wanted to think about the experience that the land had in regard to colonization. And so when we think about the land in terms of colonization, what we realize is that not only have we been taken from the land, but there have been other things taken from the land that have caused the land to be out of balance. When we first came here, we had looked at a lot of different places. And when we first came here, and we came here a roundabout sort of way, it's a great story that I tell people that come here. Some of the people on the call have heard it before. I was walking on a back portion that led up to a field that we have out behind the farmhouse and the barn, where a lot of our ceremonies are held. And none of that stuff was there. There's no ceremonial space there. Now there's a ceremonial space. There's 3 different garden areas. There's a berry orchard, a fruit orchard, and a vegetable orchard. We have a greenhouse. We have another men's ceremonial space, and we have a yurt in that area. And, you know, none of that was there. There was just a small path that went up to the top of this hill where this field is located. And I had 2 of my board members with me. They were both native and both from the same language centers that I come from. They have the same language base that I have. And I said to one of them in the language, this land is really beautiful. And they turned around and they said, you know, this land is really beautiful. They answered me back in the language. And all of a sudden we could feel this rising up from the land. It was as if the land sat up and said, who's speaking this language? I have relationship to this language because our people have been here for thousands and thousands of years, for millennia. We can trace our lineage archaeologically to this territory for 13,000 years. Being in relationship for 13,000 years is not something that's forgotten easily. In the land, even though we've been separated for 200 years, this particular parcel that I bought here for the Wajukam Tiltina kinship community was taken from our people 200 years ago when Maine became a state and was gifted to another family in a land grant. And almost 200 years to the day, I bought it back. And so when I came here and I started to speak the language and the land heard that language, for the land, it was a short period of time when its relatives had been missing. And the land recognized us when we returned and sat up and said, hello, I see you, you know, I've missed you. And so we say that, you know, there were a lot of places that captured our imagination, some that tugged at our hearts, but this is the only place that literally reached up and grabbed a hold of our feet. And when you start out in that way, in relationship with the land that way, where you not only recognize the land, but the land recognizes you because of long history, you behave towards one another in different ways. The ways that we behave towards the land, the ways that the land responds and behaves with us is one of kinship and relationship. And so we have here a learning center at the Land Peace Foundation. We have Indigenous leadership programs and environmental justice programs. And
1 minute.
Okay, and I'll give you the nutshell version of the work we're doing here on the land for the rematriation. There are a lot of people who are grabbing land and they're putting it into trust. And that's not sufficient for the time that we are living in. One of the responsibilities that we have in this process of taking back the land and rematriating the land is restoring the land to its most full sense of health and well-being, so that the land can heal itself. The earth can begin the process of healing itself because we're restoring it. So we have regenerative agricultural processes. We have soil remediation happening here. We have restorative and regenerative forestry programs that are happening here. We're working so that we're healing the soil. We're taking out opportunistic trees and we're putting back in deeper rooting trees. Where we're doing all of the things that reintroducing things that were taken away from the land in that colonization process, that severance, right? We're reintroducing the things that the land needs to be healthy and to thrive. And so that's true rematriation of the land. It's healing the impacts of that severance that the land has experienced and giving the land the greatest opportunity to be in its whole healthy state, because the earth will survive without us. We won't survive without the earth being healthy. And as long as we exist here on this planet as human beings, our relationships, our well-being, our healing, and our future sustainability is all tied to the health, the well-being, and the future sustainability of our ecosystems and Mother Earth. And so as we're reconnecting our heartstrings to the heart of Mother Earth, part of that loving and caring for her and caring for ourselves is the restoration of health within all of our systems that are connected through that process. So I'll end there and say, Basilda and Dilnabamuk, I offer this and all of the work that we're doing here to all of my relations. And Kachiwaliwan, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk with you here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherri. It was very beautiful. We'll put Sherri's and also Vicki's websites in the chat so that you can have them available, but you can also find them on our website. And I just want to make a note, when Sherri was talking about the 177 women, I had the pleasure of being there, and Sherri organized an international multicultural group of leaders to actually hold the space for women who were doing that work there. And I can say that those women showed up, they did the work, and they left transformed, and the world will be different because of their commitment. So it's beautiful. Thank you, Sherri, for that. And I want to welcome Pat McCabe, because it's this beautiful initiative that I'm participating in right now that I get to see Pat almost every week. So welcome again, Pat. We're happy to have you here.
Ooh, wow, thank you. Yate Bene. I thought it would be good to go last, to have some information to go on, but I'm a little kind of blown wide open here with all this beauty and insight. So what I need to do is I need to sing a song. So I'll just ask that everybody else be muted. I think everybody is, but that helps the sound for a song on Zoom. But I wanna sing a grandmother calling song to help me orient here about what would be good to say, and also just to engage us in another way. So this was a song that was given to me to sing in any circumstance that I feel called to sing it. We ha ya hey ya, we ya hey ya huero. We ha ya hey ya, we ya hey ya huero. Eh yo, we ha ya hey ya, we ya hey ya huero. Eh yo, we ha ya we ha ya we ya. We ya huero, hey yo. We ha ya hey ya, we ya huero. weya, weya, ya, wero, eya, heyo, wehaya, ehaya, wehaya, ehaya, weya, weya, ya, wero, eya, eyo, wehaya, heya, weya, ya, wero, wehaya, heya, weya, ya, wero, eyo, wehaya, heya, weya, weya, ya, wero, eya, eyo, wehaya, ehaya, wehaya, ehaya, weya, weya, ya, wero, eya, eyo, wehaya, heya, weya, ya, wero, wehaya, heya, weya, ya, wero, eyo, wehaya, heya, weya, weya, ya, wero, eya, eyo, wehaya, ehaya, wehaya, ehaya, weya, weya, ya, wero, eya, eyo. Heyo, heyo, I'm just going to ask us all to take a few breaths together. So let's inhale together and exhale. Inhale again and exhale. And inhale one more time together. And exhale. If you need to stretch a little, move a little, yes. Be in this glorious body here for a moment and spirit. So I want to, I was sending that song to Men's Nation, where you are, Sherri, and to this process and dedicating what's happening here right now, that it might travel, and that, you know, the waters, this is a little cedar water from a women's ceremony I was just at recently, that the waters listen to what's being said here and can understand where we're at in our learning as human beings, and that can travel where it needs to go, and also that which has teachings for us in this process can find us and reach us. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it after that song. And so my mama named me Patricia Catherine McCabe. I happen to have this right here. Here's my mama. She passed 2 weeks after her 100th birthday party in February. Our matriarch. But she's right here, so it's all good. And I'll say I come from Diné Nation, so I'll say She'e'ia, Tachi Inashli, Aro Ashi Ibashishi, Ma'idishkeshne Dashanale, Klaus Chi Dao Shiche, Aquatao Stani Nashli. So when I also speak a little bit about what that means to introduce myself in that way. So that's acknowledging my the mother's lineage, my own mother, and then my father's mother. That's where we get our clans from. And I'll also say that these clans are referring to different places on the earth that we have had a deep relationship with. And so I'm thinking about this rematriation. So what I say, you know, so when my daughter, Lila June, some of you know her, and Sherri mentioned her, when my daughter, Lila June, had her womanhood ceremony, you know, what really occurred to me in that, so she had the first or the second traditional womanhood ceremony, in our family in 4 generations. And that was because of the effects of the attempted genocide in the residential boarding schools that were attempting to make us forget who we are, who we could be as human beings. But what I really saw in that was that, you know, we had elders donating their entire crop of corn on her behalf. Part of the ceremony is to make a corn cake that's like a shovel length in diameter in the ground. It's a big corn cake. But I just really thought about what that has meant over time to, you know, when a young woman comes into a place of being able to further the next generations. Basically, you know, we have that ceremony after her first moon time and before her second. And so we can't just put it on the calendar and plan that way. Like her biology tells us when it's time, and everything has to come to a stop because it's an elaborate ceremony and it's 4 days and it requires a lot of work and also material. So, you know, just thinking, so why would our peoples invest in that way in a young woman becoming life bringer? This makes me want to cry right there. Because we're so far from that, you know. And I'll show a little image here. This is how we think of her at that time, this young woman. This is actually changing women standing in the middle of our 4 sacred mountains that have been our instructors about how to be a human being here on this Mother Earth. But you know, part of what I've thought about that is that the community invests so deeply in this young woman furthering life in one way or another, partly because of our relationship with place and how place causes our lives to thrive and causes our lives to have beauty, but also how we get to participate in creating beauty with our relatives, flying ones, swimming ones, creepy crawling ones, 4-legged ones, but also with place, with water, with Standing Nation, with the trees, and also how we get to participate in the conversation that takes place between this Mother Earth and cosmos. And so the fact that this young woman has come into a time where she could potentially bear you know, our literal future generations, but who knows what other kinds of babies she's going to bear and bring to us in this life. You know, that's a moment for the whole community to pause and to acknowledge and to offer all the support we can possibly give to her. So this is also speaking to our understanding of sustainability. I really don't enjoy that word so much. It's way too sterile for what's actually going on. I would much prefer to call it the mad love affair. How could you not have a mad love affair with place when you're seeing it and working and being a part of it like this, right? But, you know, so this is our understanding of how we participate in the thriving of life. And that's happening through this young woman, and the young men also have their ceremony. And it's although I got to say that one is fewer and farther between even since boarding schools and etc. So we have some work to do there, and I'm very inspired by this men's work that you're doing right now, Sherri. So I was just thinking about that, you know, to name my clans is to speak to my place in that lineage of the women and the clans being passed down that way. I wanted to also speak to this idea of there was so much that you said, Vicki, that I wanted to respond to. I don't know that I really have time. I'm a little scattered because there was so much that came in and it spurred so much thinking. But part of what I wanted to speak to is this idea of Indigenous Europe being, you know, you kind of were referring to it as being farmers, and that time, and also that the duration of that was 3,000 or 4,000 years, perhaps. And so when I think about the growing, because my son's growing ceremonial corn, again, which is actually getting harder and harder to find. Here's an air from last year. So it's so powerful to have that be here with us. But I was thinking about, there's different kinds of farming, obviously, right? As we're noticing in our current society today, that there is this industrial agricultural pull absolutely everything we can out of the land and then move on, or not worry about what's happening to the earth or to the life all around it. So that's one level of farming. And then my daughter just completed her PhD on traditional land management practices. And a lot of what she's pointing out in that work is showing how indigenous, she calls it land management practices versus agriculture, because when we think of agriculture, we talk, it's an extraction process often at this point. But really, this is about a relationship with earth and with land that, so like the hardwood forests in the Southeast were cultivated. She asserts that even the rainforests in South America were part of a big part of a cultivation by human beings. So the lungs of the earth we've contributed to. And what I love about her work that way is, one, it's showing that indigenous, she often says we're presented as hunter-gatherers, like we're just stumbling around in loincloths happening upon berries or something. But in reality, once again, we're having this profound relationship with place and with earth, and collaborating and cooperating, and creating a kind of synergy, creating a symbiosis with place and in large areas too. So this is a different kind of farming, and I want to point that out, that I believe that was also taking place in Europe. But the thing about it is it's hard to identify, because it's meant to be in harmony. So we're not disturbing the land in ways like we do now when we talk about farming, where it's very clear where we have been. We leave a trail a mile wide where we've been, but that hasn't been the case always, right? So I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about my son growing this corn. And I want to also say that this removal from place and the disconnection from land is, I mean, this kind of goes without saying, but I'll go ahead and say it, is traumatic, no matter which human being. I mean, we're witnessing this even in North Carolina at the moment. People who maybe have only been there for a generation, or even 6 months, or maybe 2 or 3 generations, to be torn out of place and have the entire landscape change the way it has, is speaking to the devastation of being torn from place. But what I want to bring up, as I'm singing that song, I was thinking about my son is actually roasting corn in a fire pit today as he's harvesting, and it's a preservation technique for the corn, right? And but I was thinking that he was at Standing Rock, and I love this idea that men can be matriarchal. Wise men can be matriarchal, although we'll talk about that word a little bit. It's a little troublesome for me, but I was thinking that his plan as a water protector now is to help people in our community fall in love with the land and the water. So we have a waterway system called the Acequia system here in northern New Mexico. I don't know where else in the United States they might have it. I don't know where that I know of. I've only seen it in Ecuador, actually. But obviously the water comes down out of the mountain in streams, and here it goes into these ditches, these acequias, and these ditches have names, and they're associated with generations of families. And it's a matter of personal honor and relationship to make sure that those waterways are maintained and kept clean, so that the next neighbor so that water will flow down to the next person who's growing. And so here's this system of cooperation and collaboration through an entire bioregion that we just don't see everywhere. And so he's working on 36 different properties this year to reconnect people. Some fields haven't been opened and that water hasn't been used for over 100 years in our valley. And so that's his sense of water protection. And I feel very proud of him that that's how he's thinking about it, because he's like, if you can make these people fall in love with the land and the water, they're not going to let anything happen to it. So for me, that's a very profound rematriation. Gosh, let me go over here where I was going to talk about this before I heard what everybody else had to say here. So I want to bring this into play here. So this is a symbol. It's describing the construct of Mother Earth, perhaps. We could maybe see it like this too, but here's what it looks like from the top. And so it's talking about, it's been described as talking about the different races of mankind. It's talking about different times in a human being's life. It's talking about all the medicines and spiritual help that lie in all four of the sacred directions, and above and below, perhaps as well, and at the center. But the way it was shown to me actually in a vision was that every single life form gets to have a seat on this sacred hoop here. And we as human beings also get to have a seat here. And so we, every single being has to make its contribution to this hoop. And every single being has a perfect design, they say, to make its contribution. And when every single being makes their contribution, then the integrity of the hoop is solid, it's strong, it's whole. But when any of the beings either disappear, as is happening now, or if they're prevented from enacting their perfect design for thriving life, then the integrity of the hoop begins to fail. And so I feel like that's kind of what we're looking at the moment. But a couple things about this. This one, it's speaking to how deeply interrelated we are. This is speaking to the principles of the clan, at least for us, and I would imagine for others, which is to say, I cannot be well if you are not well. There's no way that can be. And so that is actually the reality of the underlying economy of this Mother Earth. Nobody can take it all and expect to be well, because it's going to deprive every other being from being able to enact its perfect design for thriving life. So when I think about a couple things that come up for me around that. So this place is highly, highly relational that we're in. In order to be able to consider every other being, we have to think relationally. And, you know, when Vicki was speaking and saying, you know, so what happened to interrupt this goddess culture? Or what happened to interrupt this understanding, I'll say, for my part, of how interrelated we are? Because when we look at, you know, so many different groups of human beings that we often refer to as indigenous human beings that have made a very deep study of being a human presence in a particular place, there was an understanding of the situation, right? That I can't be well if you're not well. And so when I think about that level of relationality, I feel like this is also speaking to the feminine aspect that we hold. And again, that's across all genders, that this is a part of the medicine of that feminine. And this is the part of the understanding that the feminine brings. So that's also part of an underlying part of economy. But I wanted to go back to this idea of the goddess society, because I remember in school, and I read in Riane Eisler's The Chalice and the Blade. And that's when these ideas first started coming up for me. And I was thinking, because I came up to the same burning question, what the heck happened anyway? Like, where did this insertion of violence come in? And I have my theories about that that get kind of that can help me, that might make me lose some of my audience here. But I think it didn't come from Earth. There's nothing on Earth that behaves like that. There's just nothing on Earth that is like indigenous to Earth that behaves like that. So something came in. But what I want to say about the goddess culture is I want to point out that for me, when I was, because Riane Eisler's assertion is that in all these, you can archaeologically track where all these communities, these settlements were, and she points out that none of them were fortified. They were not prepared for war. But that at a certain point, and it came from the north of Europe, presence came in, and suddenly you begin to see these human settlements becoming fortified. They have walls built around them, and etc. So her conclusion is that prior to that time, we were living under, or Europe was living under this idea or this premise of the goddess, and that at a certain point, the way of the god, which was warlike, came in. And I feel like it might be helpful to express what came up for me in that, and that is that her reasoning about the part of the reasoning of her goddess, and I would love to know more information about it, is that there were all these figurines, and we saw some images of those of women's bodies, right? But what I want to point out, and this comes from my own homecoming to my own culture, out of Christianity and out of ferocious academia, and noticing the shift in terms of my own understanding of the medicine I carry. My biology gives me a spiritual capacity as the female of our kind. And so when I think about, I feel like maybe even the female anthropologists are still looking at what they're observing there through the wound of the wars that we have now, through patriarchy, we'll call it. But what I wonder is if the societies then were actually just acknowledging life. Because in indigenous cultures, we say the woman is synonymous with life. The woman is synonymous with earth. And so perhaps those figurines were actually just saying, we put life at the center, more than we put women at the center, more than even we put goddess as the highest being. And so to me, that shifts things just a little bit to think about it that way. And so for my part, the way I identify when I'm speaking sometimes is I say, I am holy earth surface walker, which is a Diné way of thinking about human beings. I am a holy earth surface walker, life bringer, life bearer, and I stand with the full authority of this Mother Earth behind me, below me, around me. And it's always my place to speak on behalf of life. And it's always my place to ask, are we placing life at the center in every circumstance? And it's also my place, if we are making plans or if we're moving forward into action, to ask, are we putting life at the center with this? And if not, it's my place to say, then we must begin again. Right? And so I feel, and actually that part of that fierceness in that declaration actually comes from the Kogi coming to visit us here in the Southwest, the elders of the Columbia, from Columbia, from the Sierra Nevadas. And they said, to the women we say, you must move and speak and act with the authority of the mother. You must move and speak and act with the authority of the mother. And so I really took that to heart. And so on the one hand, we could say that that I'm identifying with goddess, but actually what I feel from that, and what I feel like I see within my own indigenous culture, is that I'm identifying with life. I am responsible for standing for that life in every circumstance. And so for me, that's powerful, because that kind of breaks down that binary, that kind of breaks down that dualistic way. Because I feel like there are, you know, and especially in my work around the witch hunts, which is a long story, that Genevieve knows a little bit about, and Letecia too. But I say I came to understand the wounding that happened to Men's Nation there. Men's Nation, we might say, fundamentally, their spiritual signature, if you will, is that they are protectors of life, and they are providers for the life bringer, the elders, and the children. And what happened in Europe was they were torn out of that sacred role. And there were, of course, there were men who were desperate to protect their wives, their daughters, their spouses, and they were not able to. The circumstances became so violent and so difficult that they were not able to. And I will agree that that was the breaking down of the way of the circle of Europe, and those methodologies were learned, European upon European, and then they were sent out on the ships. And so the men that were sent out on the ships were the sons and grandsons of those who were made to watch these brutalities against their mothers, against their sisters, against their aunts. These men were traumatized. And that, to me, is helpful for maintaining the tenderness and the generosity of my heart, because it tells me, you know, they were, because there was no explanation for the level of violence and cruelty that came on those ships, until I can understand that these men were lights on, nobody home in many ways from the trauma that they had experienced themselves. So in that sense, I feel that, you know, I also want to say that I feel like in Europe, they fought this. They fought this for hundreds of years, just like we're fighting it right now. And this is the connection I really want to make. You guys fought it because you knew. And we're fighting it right now. So I'm going to agree that we need to be allies in this work. Oh,
1 minute.
Thank you. There's so much I wanted to cover here, and just had so much moving. But I want to just speak one moment to what Letecia was bringing up, and that Genevieve is also a part of, which is Mother Law, this course that's going on for some weeks, 6 weeks, I guess it was, around mother law, and also around being complicit no more with the doctrine of discovery. Whew. So the main point I want to make there in this very brief moment is just that, you know, we're working with a Bear Clan mother, Louise, and all of a sudden I'm drawing a blank on her last name because I just always call her Mama Bear. But she was one of the instigators of this, and she was talking about how when the U.S. Looked to the Iroquois Confederacy and wanted to adopt their governance, some of their governing principles, right? Well, and I say this is a perfect example of what can happen with appropriation, how it can go awry, because they took this governance structure and they superimposed it into this, you know, in this superimposed nation state on indigenous continent, and they left out the key thing, which is the matriarchal leadership aspect. They liked everything else, but they didn't want that. But that was the key. That was the key. And so what Mama Bear says is this nation is so hungry for mother. This nation is so hungry for mother. And I'll also just name that similar to you, Sherri, and I'm listening to your bylaws, and I'd love to talk to you about it, that I've also been asked to steward land that is at the base of one of our 4 sacred mountains. And I'm going to agree that the rematriation of that has very little to do with human justice. It has everything to do with coming back into that posture of humility and listening and asking the mountain, our original teacher who gave us our instructions, what is it that you're asking for now? How can we be of service? And it might be drawn on cultural, racial lines, but so far, not at all. It's talking about humanity in general. The mountain is speaking about what human beings can do at this moment. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Yes. I want everybody to just take that really deeply in and yeah. What was missing in the Constitution was the mother law. And that was, and mother law, again, where mother law is about the reconnection to Mother Earth and our relationship to each other as women. And as women, from the very first teaching was we have a responsibility and an obligation, a responsibility to mother law and an obligation to stand tall, an obligation that's not a burden, but a responsibility because we are that place in the universe, the only place that we bring forward life. And we need to make sure that life comes through in a good way. That's our job, that's basically it. And so the practices that are present in this room today with all three, Vicki, Pat, and Sherri, and now I'm including Jen, is to bring this both obligation and responsibility with an open heart to you to make these decisions about how we need to shift our paradigm and work together in a solid sisterhood to be able to make this place a place of beauty for everyone here. So with that, I just want to thank Sherri and Pat and Vicki. And we don't have very many questions, and we've almost used up our time, but I see this as a place of good teaching. And I would like to see if Jen has some words that she'd like to offer in closing, and then I'll come to each of you, Vicki, Sherri, and Pat, for your closing words as well. So Jen.
Well, I just want to thank you all for the gifts of your teachings and your words that we can receive, all of us, in order to give our gifts back and around to try to solve these huge problems that we have now and continue in a good way on Mother Earth. So thank you so much. And let's keep talking and discussing all of this and collaborating. Thank you so much.
I take that as an invitation to have part 2. So if the three of you are amenable, and maybe we'll bring in more friends, that we'll find a way to continue this conversation at this very deep, heartfelt way. All right, let me check in with Vicki. Vicki, do you have some parting words that you'd like to offer to us?
I'm having the experience I always have in these kind of encounters where I just feel like crying. I just want to cry and cry and cry. And I won't do that here. I'll save it for later, but it's so important that we come together. And I feel so honored that I'm able to have dialogue with you all. But I also want to say again that I really have come to the point where I understand, and especially what Sherri said about place and rather than time. Oh my God, we're orphans in America. We came from another place. We don't know our place at all. We move around. We don't even live where our parents live mostly, so I feel devastated by that. And also I feel, again, like I'm in your service. I feel like all of us, it's not that we haven't done good work. I love the work we've done in the women's spirituality movement and the matriarchal studies movement. I applaud it. But I also feel at this moment in time, we just need to be in your service, because you're still living without a disconnection from what it is that we understand that we lost such a long time ago, and that we're trying so hard to come back into our bodies and back into some sense of connection with Mother Earth. But we're like transplants, you know, we're like somebody pulled us up by the roots. So I don't know that we'll get there fully without your leadership. And I just feel like crying. I just feel like this is a really big integration, and I'm glad I lived long enough to be having this dialogue. Bless your hearts.
Thank you so much, Vicki. Sherri.
You know, I just want to put my arms around you, Vicki. You know, there's so much truth in this. You know, there's so much pain of uprooting that has been passed down from the generations. But there's also the brilliance of our ancestral memory. You know, and you see these memes all the time now that we're not just carrying our ancestral wounds, we're carrying our ancestral gifts. And so, you know, if you walk outside today, wherever you are, and you take your shoes off and you put your feet on the earth, you're standing on the same ground that your ancestors stood on before their way of being was interrupted. You're breathing the same air that was breathed by all those who came before you. When you drink water, you're drinking the same water that moved through the bodies of your ancestors. And the natural elements have deep, deep memory. And so when you reconnect yourself wherever you're standing, to the earth, to the soil, to the winds, to the waters, you're connecting yourself to all those who have moved around the place and the space where you are currently living. And this one living earth that we are living in relationship with carries the memory of all those who have lost their way. They haven't been lost along the way. They've simply lost their way, and the way can be refound. And so in this severing that you're feeling, simply putting your feet on the ground, calling to the blood memory of those who have lived in relationship with and formed the soil beneath your feet can reconnect you. And so I just want to share that with you and just send you the warmest embrace, because the pain that we feel at being separated from our homelands, we have not been separated from our homelands here in this territory. They've just shrunk considerably. They've been infringed upon. We know that the pain that you feel at your separation for being disconnected, not only from place, but from Mother Earth herself, is significant. So I want to acknowledge that and send love to you and to all those who are experiencing that type of pain, and to just remind you that you haven't been lost. You've just lost your way a bit, and that you can come back onto the path. So
Thank you, Sherri. Matt, do you have some words you'd like to offer to us in closing?
Yes, I just want to say thank you so much for hosting this salon. Thank you for having me. Thank you to Vicki and Sherri. Very good to meet you here today, and hope to continue conversation. I really, what I wrote here when I was listening to you, Sherri, was I said, and also thinking about the way sometimes I introduce myself as the female of our kind, that rematriation is maybe the recentering of life, because we forgot that you always have to keep your eye on life. And so many of our institutions and governing and et cetera, and our ways of identifying ourselves as human beings are around structures that were created without thinking about putting life at the center. So at this time, it's painful to come back into a different, like, I have to let go of those identities, because we're really being called to recenter life again. And that's a scary process in many ways. But I also want to point out something that my someone I consider an elder, although I think he's younger than I am, Orland Bishop, talks about. He talks about African Americans, and talk about being severed from land. But in a way, I can't really quote him, but what he inspired me to think about was that there's a very profound role that they have for that severing and for still carrying this lineage in a new circumstance where they kind of have to move blindly because of that cultural severing. But he sees them as it all being very intentional, and that their wayfinding is key to to the future, as he talks about it, that's already all around us. So I think about it that way. And one other thing that I really wanted to do here, if I may, and I know we're right at time, but this is the rematriation of resource. And so this was a prayer that came to me when we were making trying to reimagine money and protect the sacred, and moving with money in a different way. So I said, together we make a place where thriving life, where future, where what is holy can meet, align, harmonize, and have access to our construct that we call money, where all that has been extracted from the Mother Earth, from the bodies of men, women, and children, from the body of the oceans, from the sky, from the bodies of the flying ones, the swimming ones, the creepy crawly ones, the four-legged ones, from the plants, from standing nation, the trees, from the stones, from the soil, from the waters, from the internal organs of the Mother Earth, coal, gold, oil, from the five-fingered one's goodness, from our love, from our psyches, and from our souls, from each place from which it has been extracted and gathered, from all the places where the flow of what is needed for cycling, spiraling life has been confined, directed, channeled into ways that do not serve thriving life, or love, or light, that do not serve future. All of this decimation of the beauty, harmony, balance, substance, and the sacred movement of life is now here recognized, reconciled, revered, and placed in the healing hands and volition of a deep and holy co-creation. It is now released, flowing out and flowing out and flowing out, a dam released to the places most critical, to the places most generative, to the places most restorative, to the places most joyful, to the places most creative for the wholeness and integrity of interbeing, to the places most sacred, to the places most affirmative of our true desire and our deepest consent to live unto 7 generations, to live with all our relations on this sacred, thriving, powerful earth, to align with her boundless creativity, ingenuity, and unconditional love in the creation of endless, ever-evolving life. We give our love here. We give our place in fearless generosity here. We give our faith here. We give our place in radical abundance here. We give our consent here. With this opening, we break the bondage that was law over love. We open and prepare ourselves to love the future in ways that the scarcity paradigm would not allow. We give this power and ask it to give us future. With our participation in this gathering, with the sacred gift of our volition, from the place on the sacred hoop of life that we have been given to uphold, we open this field to receive the future of the very highest possibility for life, light, and love. May all that this flow encounters be touched and transformed in whatever way is right by this currency of consciousness that has reached out to us, and flow into and through the future consciousness that we are growing into. Holy life, holy future, please guide and direct us. Show us the ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Jen, did you want to say something before I close this out?
Yes, could you give us a copy of your prayer, this prayer, Pat?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'll send it to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. And we'll just make sure that a copy of it can be downloaded with the video so that people can have it. Thank you so much. That was really, really beautiful. I just want to thank those of you who are with us today in the room for your apt attention. I think we've had such a great teaching from these 3 women, and our hearts have been opened. I want to thank Diane for holding the space for us in the technology and making sure that, that we don't ever go down, that we don't go over too far. And I want to thank Liliana, who has been at the ready if there were questions that needed to be inserted, and she really holds the space for us to make sure that the best of what we have to offer is offered to you. I want to thank Genevieve, Vaughan, and the International Feminists for a Gift Economy for inspiring us to continue to have these really amazing experiences as salons. And I want to leave you with this word. In 2 weeks, we're going to have, that's October the 26th, our 72nd salon. 72. So we are very excited, and we'll make sure that we send information out as soon as that's available to you. And as we get ready to leave this virtual space, I want to share with you, and some of you have already heard this word, but this is a Tagalog word. This is at the heart of what it means to be a good human being in the Filipino culture. The language, it's a Tagalog word. The word is kapwa. And kapwa, K-A-P-W-A, that means the self in the other. It means I am intrinsically connected to you. And I cannot be myself without you, without another. Because without you, I wouldn't know who I am. So we know each other in that way, and it brings the best of us forward, not as a competition, but because it brings us all to be the best that we can be. So I want to leave you with that, and may we all work towards rematriating the world and bring all wars to close. Peace, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us. Bye for now.